take that wire and I compound it on itself once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, each of the current flows passing over and over give the effect of a higher current. So if I have a current of 1 unit flowing through a wire, if I take that wire and coil it around so that every part, the wires are going in the same direction, will be 1 amp, 2 amp, 3 amp, and if I put 100 turns of wire on there, I have 100 amps. Now I have a magnetic field that makes iron jump around on the table, not just compasses. And this was the beginning of the electric motor and the telegraph relay. And the telegraph relay kind of had a weird start in all this because it was developed by a painter by the name of Morse, who knew nothing about electricity, but enough experiments had been done that it was now known that electricity could be conveyed with a transmission structure from point A to point B. A monk in, I think it was France, did the final experiment of connecting the entire town's folks together, hand to hand with 25-foot pieces of wire in between, and discharged a giant electrostatic condenser, which at that time had just been developed by Franklin. And everybody jumped simultaneously. They made a line 1 mile, and everybody jumped together. And at that point, that was the final proof that electricity was then thought instantaneous and can be conveyed to any point. It was a madhouse place, lots of bottles of wine going down in his guts all the time, drugs I've never heard of before. But at any rate, that's where the action. When you live on the street, you're more tolerant. So he goes into his room and he pulls out this screwed up cardboard box, about this big. He dumps it on the table and he goes, "Well, you're so smart. Tell me what these are." And I go, "What do you got here?" He goes, "These are my father's tubes." Okay, well, I knew about the TV, but these weren't TV tubes. Okay, so I pick up the tubes. I've been playing with tubes since I was 6 years old. My grandmother used to build them in RCA. It's just in my genes. I look at these tubes, and these things they're crazy. Anybody would say this is insanity. Okay, big giant grids, but no cathodes, and like electrodes sticking out of the side, sticking all this stuff, and but the thing is, I know how to make tubes. So I'm looking at them, and I start to see what's going on here. And he's sitting there. Remember that cartoon character of that dog that would laugh with that kind of horse after the dog screwed somebody that screwed him? I forget the character. That's exactly how Philo laughed. It was that kind of... You couldn't really hear it. It was kind of like a growling inside. He was content. So I pulled this one tube out, which was just an empty quart of glass, and it had an umbilical cord, so to speak, that came off of it to pump all the air out during operation. It was a laboratory tube. They broke it off the pump and, and discarded it after the experiment. Said 2 little metal shells pointing at each other, kind of like 2 little mirrors, coated with some kind of crappy-looking stuff, silver cesium oxide compound, and a simple ring in the middle. Well, it's a simple, electrostatic focus tube with an anode in the middle, and the 2 plates, the little tiny wires came in because the voltage was so high, and I guess it had to be oil or something around. It looked like it operated about 100,000 volts, which is a lot for a small tube. But I look at the glass had been all attacked by something. So it used to be in the old color TVs, there was a certain tube that shorted out the high voltage so that it couldn't get out of control. It's called the shunt regulator, 6BK4, and they glow every color in the rainbow and make the TV repairmen sick. And what it does is it turns the glass, the radiation turns the glass on the tube chocolate brown. And that's how you can tell how long the tube's been in the set. So I'm looking at this glass, and it's like all baked by some kind of incredible electrical activity that couldn't have come through those little tiny wires. So I go, Philo, something took off in this tube, didn't it? And then he stopped laughing and got all crappy with me again. I go, Philo, tell me what happened in the tube. And so he told me I could see what happened. What happened is and this is about 1932, is Farnsworth was working with a radically new vacuum tube technology, did not use any of these glowing cathodes or any of these emitters. The patent situation back then was such that RCA owned radio. You couldn't build anything. That's what started in Bolinas with the Alexanderson system. Lit this thing up, a star appeared in the middle, turn off the power, and it stayed there for a brief period of time. So that changed my life forever. So here you have this giant laboratory and all these billions and billions and billions of kilowatt-hour dollars being expended and all the grooviness and frigate bird activity that goes along with it. And here's some guy in a laboratory on Green Street in San Francisco, okay, on a poverty existence because he's never got anything out of television, does the same thing in an empty bottle, for so to speak.
Where are the two now?
The Farnsworth family still has them, but it doesn't stop there. So what happened is my first laboratory got destroyed in San Francisco, and that's when I lost most of the RCA equipment. That's all based on the campaign slogan, Diane will make a difference. So that's when San Francisco basically swirled into the outgoing tide. So my 8 cents a square foot went to $1 a square foot. So now how are you going to move tons of, switchboards 15 feet high, transformers that weigh 4,000 or 5,000 pounds? Commonweal already smashed the rest of it at RCA. The Park Service got my warehouse at Fort Mason Pier 3. So everything went to the dump. And it was time to eat out of garbage cans again for another couple of years. So what I did is I made friends with a high school kid up there in Bolinas who was a prodigal genius type thing that Philo had trained at an early age. The kid was a genius beyond belief in a lot of different areas. He started hanging out with me. So we built a laboratory in this bedroom. So what I did is I took some of the remaining pieces from RCA and configured them. I decided, well, there's nothing else to do with this stuff other than make a Tesla coil. But make it the way Tesla decided to make it. At any rate, to make a long story short, we worked with this and experimented, went out to RCA, got more transmitter parts, because, I could always go back out and get more, because the station was still operating then. We build this thing. I take old burned out street lights. We're using the experiment. We get dumpster loads of them from Lease Light in San Francisco. The street lights off of Van Ness Street. They pull them out every certain amount of months. There's a whole dumpster full of them somewhere. There used to be. We put the street light in these monopolar fields that I just described from these coils. And the street light that we used for this experiment was the one we'd used previously for all of our spark gap experiments and everything. And something had started to transform with the bulb. We put this thing in the field within a matter of a minute or two of working the thing in the field. You have to be careful because they explode violently. Full galaxy appears inside the bulb, just like a picture of one of these Nova TV deals. You can spins, whole thing, the stars, the nebulas, the suns, all the colors of the rainbow is spinning inside a burned out street light and virtually powering and containing itself, which has gone beyond the Farnsworth. Now we have a whole astronomical creation floating around in a light bulb on a workbench, and then it explodes the bulb. But after it explodes the bulb, for like 1/10 of a second, it's not long, it sits there without any bulb to contain it.
What is it? What's in it?
That's the creative force. This electrical monopolar field is how creation comes about. There is no evolution or any of that type of stuff. It's the electrical field at the time creates what exists, and it's always changing this way and that way. All living organisms are all based, just like all machines, are all based on the same mathematical function. All trees, plants, flowers, humans, everything's based on what's called the golden ratio. It's a definite geometric pattern, and all these electrical discharges associated with these Tesla transformers are all golden ratio proportioned and tend to be self-organizing and self-powering. So that ends the story. $1 trillion in the Livermore laboratories, and a deranged high school kid and a homeless person go beyond it in the laboratory.
The birthday of Mithra was celebrated on December 25th. Mithra is the The birthday of Mithra was celebrated on December 25th. Mithra is depicted as being born from a rock. He is shown as emerging from a rock already in his youth, with a dagger in one hand and a torch in the other. He is nude, standing with his legs together, and is wearing a Fijian cap. Sometimes he is shown coming out of the rock as a child, and in one instance, he has a globe in one hand, and sometimes a thunderbolt is seen. He is also known as Sol Invictus, the divine sun, or the unconquered sun, Mithra. The Phrygian cap Mithra wears is the same cap worn by Santa Claus and his elves.
Time when you're watching a DVD only is dictated by where you are in the DVD. So when you're watching here, your past is there and your future is there. When you're watching there, your past is there, your future is there. And yet it's only dictated by that part of the information field that you are decoding at that time. There is only the now, that which is all. There is no time and space within that dazzling darkness. It's illusion. It's a perception of time that we have. And this is a great line. The present moment is the only moment available to us, and it is the door to all other moments. Why? Because there is only that moment. And the more we get pulled into the future, fear, more we get pulled into the past, regret, we're getting pulled out of the now into some illusory past and future. And what the left brain does is it takes information in that now and it puts it in a sequence. And that sequence appears to us to be the passage of time. We're back to the DVD. Einstein said, when you are courting a nice girl, an hour seems like a second. When you sit on a red-hot cinder, a second seems like an hour. That's relativity. Relativity is what? Your perception of how you decode reality.
By 250 million years ago, the reptile mammals had gained ascendancy and ruled the earth. And it is from these creatures that the primitive warm-blooded mammals, the therapsids, would descend, eventually giving rise to the first true mammals, then primates, and finally woman and man. But the emerging New World Order was completely toppled 250 million years ago when the planet on our solar system smashed head-on into debris from the dwarf galaxy Sagittarius, which had been snaking around the Milky Way. Stars were being ripped from the Sagittarian Serpentine galaxy and were raining down upon the Milky Way, directly in the path of our sun and solar system. Of 35 large species of mammal, including the giant mammoths. According to nuclear scientist Richard Firestone of the U.S. Department of Energy, these meteor storms were accompanied by a hail of cometary bullets which struck the Earth, machine gunning innumerable animals and humans with iron-rich grains traveling at 10,000 kilometers per second. When this giant comet exploded, many comets circle our solar system and can take hundreds or even tens of thousands of years to complete a single orbit. Some orbit once and then exit the solar system, apparently never to return. In July of 1994, huge chunks of a giant comet named Shoemaker Levy slammed into Jupiter at a speed of 135,000 miles per hour, punching holes in the upper atmosphere many times the size of the Earth. This giant comet had broken into fragments due to Jupiter's incredible gravitational tidal forces, yet many of the comet's 21 separate pieces were over 1 mile, 2 kilometers, in size. On July 18th, a huge chunk of this comet hit Jupiter with the explosive power of over 6 million megatons of TNT, which is the equivalent of 600 times all the nuclear weapons on Earth exploding at the same time. Temperatures on Jupiter soared to over 24,000 degrees Kelvin. Over a 6-day period, 21 separate pieces of this comet slammed into Jupiter. It was as if Jupiter had been struck with all the nuclear weapons on Earth 25,000 times, the equivalent of over 600 million nuclear weapons exploding over a 6-day period. Enough firepower to destroy our planet and eradicate all life. If these 21 separate pieces of the Shoemaker-Levy comet had slammed into the Earth, our planet would not have survived. There are millions of meteors and asteroids orbiting in our solar system, and many times more probably have not yet been detected. Currently, NASA has detected over 5,000 asteroids. Many of their paintings show a complete mastery of geometric awareness, and they often use the natural contours of the cave walls, including protuberances, to create a three-dimensional effect.
And then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like a snail, unwillingly to school.
from our platforms which are being readied in space. Nothing can stop us. Stay where you are.
They moved it. It's how did they make that last cut on the bottom? For us to do that today would be impossible. First of all, we'd have to peel all this back so we could get a huge big machine with a big whirling diamond tip blade to start underneath it. And as soon as it went a few feet, the pressure would stop the blade. It can't be done. Does everybody understand? And they're bigger stones than this one. 2,000 tonners in Baalbek and other places. Totally impossible. It's another one of those garbage things they tell you to keep you dumbed down about the possibility that there was indeed alien life on Earth. So if they were here for sure, is there anything to what the Sumerians said about them creating us as slaves and servants? Yes, there is. Next slide. How are we doing here? Okay, great. Mitochondrial DNA. We found out in the in the 70s that if we checked the mitochondrial DNA of our females, we could find out how far the line went back. So they said, okay, great. Let's find out if we broke from the common ancestor at 8 million years ago or 5 million years ago. So they took samples of DNA, mitochondrial DNA, which only passes down from females, from women all over the world, and what they found out was, lo and behold, it's not 8, it's not 5 million years ago, it's all the way down to 200,000 years ago. To everyone's great surprise, we don't exist as a species according to our mitochondrial DNA prior to approximately 200,000 years ago. What a surprise. So what the anthropologists have to say is, well, there was some little group somewhere, some little cluster somewhere, and all the others like us died out, and that little cluster somehow around 200,000 years ago, that little bottleneck somehow created the whole species. Garbage. Garbage. More garbage. Next slide. What they found is not that we existed, not only existed 200,000 years ago, that where we came from was South Africa. Not only when we came, but where we came. The oldest of us, the oldest of our females, come from Southern Africa. Guess what the Sumerians said? We were created in Southern Africa. So they're writing this 4,000 years ago. They're calling it on the nose. They're saying it around 200,000 years ago in Southern Africa. And that's what our geneticists are turning up. Now, just for laughs, you can imagine how this Newsweek cover went over in the Deep South and Louisiana and places like that where I come from. They tried to make these blacks look as white as they could, hoping they could skate down in the South. But, of course, it ticked off blacks everywhere, and they caught it coming and going. But they did tell the truth. Okay, next slide. This is another indication of some tampering with the cerebral cortex is the deeply convoluted surface region of the brain that is most strongly linked to intelligence. That's this stained part on the outside. Strip it off a rat, postage stamp. Monkey, postcard. Chimpanzee, typing, one sheet of typing paper. Human, 4 sheets of typing. We do it. You can cut, you can take something out, you can put anything in, and at this level you can put fish into fowl, plant into animal, anything. It all is the same at that level. Why? Because it's all made out of the same 4 base pairs and the same 20 amino acids. It's interchangeable. It's almost as if it's planned. It's almost as if somebody wants the ability to just mix and match and make things to suit the environment when the environment calls for it. It's incredible. Down at this level, it's all the same, like Legos. Next slide. When it was done on us, though, they didn't have time to do it right. They had a deadline. They were dealing with an insurrection. They had a deadline. So they had to crank them out as fast as they could. They're making a slave. Do they care if they're making mistakes? No. Do they care if it affects 1 in 100? No. Do they care if it affects 1 in 10? No. It's a slave. They do not care. So they left a lot of mistakes in us, a lot of genetic defects. And here you've got our full complement of 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, and you have 28 of our major genetic defects, but we have over 4,000. How does a species collect over 4,000 genetic defects in only 200,000 years when creatures that have been on the earth for sure for millions of years don't have even a couple of handfuls, if that many? And furthermore, how do we as a species get genetic defects that will kill you before you can reach the age of maturity and pass it on into the gene pool? How'd that get into the gene pool? We got a couple of dozen of those. The only way is if it was done with poor genetic cutting and splicing and the mistakes were just left there. It's the only way. This is something that, of course, is never talked about, but which every geneticist in the world is fully aware. Okay? Next slide. Now, this is a comparison of orangutan, gorilla, chimpanzee, human, and as you see, as we're always told, gee, our DNA is an awful lot like them. Well, of course, it's going to be like primate. If we had a hominoid up here, it would probably be even closer. But the key to this slide is not that, not the closeness, because if you know what you're doing, you can take just a few genes and make some really amazing changes. The problem is what the Anunnaki faced when they wanted to make that slave and the servant. You have to assume they have 46 chromosomes, because we have 46 chromosomes, the only primate with 46 chromosomes. All of the primates have 48. How did that happen? How could we be so much better and have lost 2 chromosomes? It's an awful lot of DNA. How could that happen? Doesn't make sense, does it? And yet we're told we're primates even though we don't have primate bones, we don't have primate muscles, we don't have primate skin, we don't have primate hair patterns. We're thick on front, light on back. We don't have that. We don't have primate heads, we don't have primate brains, we don't have primate faces, we don't have primate anything. We're not primates. So the Anunnaki have to do an important thing. They have to somehow find a way to make a zygote, a living thing, to begin this process. You've got to take a 48 chromosome creature, a 46 chromosome creature, and you've got to make them match up. How do you do that? You're going to have 24 in the sperm, 23 in the egg, 23 in the egg, 24 in the sperm. Can you take away a whole chromosome from the 48? No. Can you take away, can you add a chromosome to yours? Oh, if I didn't say it, they're using the creature of Earth. They say in the tablets, we will use the creature of Earth as a model. They wanted us to be genetically a little bit better adapted to this planet than they were. So they had that 48-46 problem. How could you do it? Sounds impossible, doesn't it? The only way is to take 2 of those chromosomes on the 48 and fuse them together so that all the chromosomal material remains, but it now only takes up 1 space in the connecting process with the 23. You with me on that? Let me see some heads. Okay, next slide. Here we go, the 2nd and 3rd chromosome of the orangutan, gorilla, chimp, but look at ours. Fused. Fused. And scientists say, well, somehow that happened in nature. Nature did that. BS. Nature couldn't do that. That is genetic engineering.
I feel obligated to warn you. At any time you are conscious of a tingling sensation, you may obtain immediate relief by screaming.
Rama Airlines could be the name given to a powerful fleet of the past, the fleet of a rich prehistoric empire ruling over northern India, known as Rama's Empire. Rama's empire is widely mentioned in the sacred literature of ancient India. It was highly developed civilization, just like ours, or even more developed at its peak around 12,000 BC. The empire had 7 major capital cities called the 7 Rises, located in northern India. In these cities, comfort and luxury were everywhere. Exquisite food, exotic zoos, and aviaries, parks in bloom. The ancient descriptions remind of modern cities, and what follows is even harder to swallow. The Rama's planes could travel anywhere on Earth, and even go to the moon or stars. To fly from one city to another, the nobles had individual aircrafts called Vimanas, and also airliners called pushpaks. According to a Jain text of 850 BC, the pushpaks were overhead trolleys used for normal transport and could carry a lot of people from one capital to another. And all this took place in an atmosphere of science fiction from the 60s that makes you want to get a closer look. The show made by the Rishi cities was really weird. Let us hope that sooner or later they will learn also from the light, apart from the palaces and big estates equipped with sophisticated pipes. We can also see their factories, geoenergy power plants, lightning sensors, and alignments of small houses for workers. What an amazing modernity for the worlds before the Great Flood. Although they are the most concerned, archaeologists are unaware of these findings. They consider totally absurd. After a lifetime spent exploring the earliest Sanskrit texts, the expert in Indian culture, Elaine Danilou, has made a startling discovery. The Vimanas are described with 2 large diamonds on the front and 2 smaller rubies in the back. Diamonds shine in white, rubies in red. Just like our modern car lights, white headlights, red taillights. Danilou was amazed, and so are we. Even on details like the color of car lights, history is repeated. Enough to confirm the existence of the Akashic records, where everything is written. During the Silver Age, many flying machines crisscrossed the sky, showing the white glare of their headlights or the red glow of their taillights. What a magical show. How could we forget it? So when it was necessary to determine the color of our contemporary vehicle's rear lights, someone has remembered this former wonder. He simply had to make a trip to the great library of the universe. It is very easy indeed. You open the door of dream. You do it every night. Quotes, descriptions, and stories about Brahmanas are numerous. Mahabharata and other scriptures of ancient India. You can find an attempt to classify them. The text distinguished three kinds of flying machines. Small Vimanas, to go from one city to another. Large Pushpakas, to go from one continent to another. And much faster gears to go into space. There's a Rukma Vimana. That's what it looks like. Or artist rendering. Vertical section. Please note, this only applies to the Indian subcontinent, because at that time, many other flying machines were moving everywhere. In the Middle East, for example, King Solomon did not despise the joys of flight. In Egypt and among the pre-Olmecs, it was also a custom with the gods. Among the Ashvin people, there was another kind of flying machine, the Icke, which could fly and sail, even under the sea. Thanks to this technological superiority, the Ashvins finally defeated the Ramas. Who were these Ashvins? Who were this rival high-tech people? Why not the Atlanteans? Then the Mahabharata would tell us the war of all against all. The war of the Atlanteans against the Ramas, of Zeus against Hecatonshires of the Anunnaki, against the great planners, the Elohim, a war of the West against the East, already probably doubled with a religious war. Already the Ramas worshipped a Trinitarian deity, and the Atlanteans themselves were strict followers of the One, as evidenced by the U.S. clairvoyant Edgar Cayce. Notice to handyman, to build your Vimana, please follow the ancient manual. Strong and durable must be the body of the Vimana, like a great flying bird, made of light material. Inside must be put the Mercury engine with its metallic heating device underneath. Thanks to the latent power of Mercury, which allows movement, a man sitting inside may travel long distances in the sky. Nowadays, the use of Mercury on that purpose has been totally forgotten until the TR-3B, and that makes our bad scientists laugh. Yeah, they're in on the fix. The movements of the Vimana, I always think there's an R in there. It's V-I mana, like a mage's mana. Vimana, are such that it can climb vertically, descend vertically, tilt forward and back. With the help of machines, human beings can fly in the air and eventually return to the ground. No one could invent out of nothing so compelling technical details. Studying these descriptions, U.S. researcher Richard Thompson makes a fundamental distinction between the two kinds of Vimanas, corresponding to two different technological approaches. All reality exists in the mind. The outer phenomenon, that which appears, is only its outer expression. The visible universe is the reflection of the invisible. Plato. Interesting. Go over to the two different types of technologies.
Because ultrasound is extremely important. One of the people who realized that was Dr. Royal Rife. In 1931, he invented the microscope. And for the first time, someone was able to see live viruses. This is the structure of the viruses. Incidentally, They have a shape of pyramid. Now, of course, the microbes, that includes viruses and bacteria and some bad cells, organisms, they are the base of all our diseases, including cancer. Now, Dr. Reif not only invented the microscope, but also he invented the machine to produce the ultrasound. And then he was checking the effects of different frequencies on viruses. And then he was able to find the frequency that kills viruses.